I discovered the yoga class happening on my private beach on a Tuesday morning in March when I walked out onto my deck with coffee in hand and found 15 women in matching athleisure doing downward dog on the sand that I paid property taxes on. My name is York Brennan, and I had spent the last 3 years of my life saving every penny from my software engineering salary to buy this beachfront property in Destin, Florida. The house itself was modest, a 2-bedroom bungalow that needed work, but it came with something priceless, 40 feet of private beach access deeded directly to my property. The previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, had been very specific about that when we closed. This stretch of sand was mine, legally and completely. I stood there on my deck, watching this spectacle unfold, trying to process what I was seeing. A woman in her mid-40s with an asymmetrical blonde haircut stood at the front of the group, calling out poses in a voice that carried easily over the sound of the waves. She wore expensive-looking yoga pants and a tank top that said, "Namaste all day," in glittery letters. "And breathe in the ocean air," she announced dramatically. "This is exactly why I chose this location for our morning sessions. The energy here is just incredible." I walked down the wooden steps from my deck to the beach, still holding my coffee. As I approached, several of the women noticed me, their poses faltering slightly. The instructor, however, seemed completely oblivious. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to be heard over the waves. The blonde woman turned, and I got my first good look at her face. She had that particular expression I had come to recognize in my 3 months of living in the Sunset Palms community, the one that said she was used to getting her way and didn't expect anyone to challenge her. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting that I was the one interrupting something important. "Yeah, actually, this is private property. My private property." She laughed, actually laughed, and turned to her class. "Ladies, give us just a moment." Then she walked toward me with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "I'm Patricia Williamson," she said, extending a hand that I didn't take. "I'm the president of the Sunset Palms HOA, and this beach area is designated for community use in our bylaws." "Your bylaws don't supersede property law," I said, keeping my voice level. "This section of beach is deeded to my property. It's in the title documents." Patricia's smile never wavered. "I think you're confused about the community regulations, Mr. Brennan, York Brennan, and I'm not confused about anything. I'm looking at 15 people trespassing on my property right now." "The HOA has always used this area for community activities," she said, as if that settled the matter. "We've been doing morning yoga here for years." "Mr. Henderson never mentioned that when I bought the place." "Well, Mr. Henderson was very elderly," Patricia said with a dismissive wave. "I'm sure he simply forgot to mention it. But don't worry, we're very respectful. We're only here from 7 to 8 in the morning, Monday through Friday. It's hardly an inconvenience." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's an inconvenience when it's my property and I didn't give permission." "I'll bring you a copy of the community guidelines," Patricia said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. "I think once you review them, you'll understand how things work here in Sunset Palms. We're a very close-knit community, and we all share our resources for the greater good." "My private beach isn't a community resource." Patricia turned back to her class without responding, clapping her hands together. "All right, ladies, let's move into Warrior 2. Don't let the negative energy disturb your practice." I stood there for another minute, watching in disbelief as they simply continued their session. Then I went back inside and started making phone calls. The first call was to my real estate attorney, David Chen, who had handled my closing. He confirmed what I already knew. The beach access was absolutely, unequivocally part of my property. There was no easement, no community access clause, nothing that would give the HOA any right to use it. "Do you want me to send them a cease and desist?" David asked. "Not yet," I said, an idea forming in my mind. "Let me try to handle this myself first. But can you send me copies of all the relevant property documents? I want everything." "Sure thing. I'll email them over this afternoon." My second call was to the Sunset Palms HOA office, where a cheerful receptionist named Marie told me that Patricia was indeed the president and that she'd be happy to take a message. "Just tell her that York Brennan called about the yoga classes on my beach," I said, "and that they need to stop immediately." Marie's cheerful tone dimmed slightly. "Oh, you're the new owner of the Henderson property. Patricia mentioned you might call. She said she was going to drop off some information for you. She can drop off whatever she wants, but those yoga classes need to stop." "I'll pass along the message," Marie said, though her tone suggested nothing would actually change. By the time I finished my calls, the yoga class had wrapped up. I watched from my window as the women rolled up their mats and chatted, several of them taking selfies with the ocean in the background. My ocean view. My beach. Patricia was true to her word, at least about one thing. Around noon, my doorbell rang, and I found her standing on my porch with a thick binder and that same condescending smile. "I brought you the community handbook," she said, holding it out. "I've bookmarked the relevant sections about shared amenities and community spirit." I took the binder but didn't invite her in. "And I'm telling you again, this beach is private property. It's not a shared amenity." "Mr. Brennan, I understand you're new to community living," Patricia said, her voice dripping with fake patience. "But we have certain traditions here. The morning yoga class is very important to a lot of our residents. It promotes wellness and community bonding." "Then do it on actual community property. There's a park 2 blocks away." "The beach energy is essential to the practice," she said, completely serious. "I'm a certified yoga instructor, and I can tell you that the proximity to the ocean makes a significant difference in the quality of the session. I don't care if you're certified by the Dalai Lama himself. It's my beach." Patricia's smile finally cracked just a little. "You know, Mr. Brennan, it's attitudes like yours that ruin communities. We're trying to build something special here, and you're being incredibly selfish about 40 feet of sand." "Selfish about my own property that I bought with my own money," I said. "Yeah, that's real unreasonable of me." "We'll see what the rest of the board has to say about this," Patricia said, snatching back her fake friendliness entirely. "We have ways of dealing with residents who won't cooperate with community initiatives." She turned and walked back to her car, a white Mercedes SUV with a license plate that read, "Yoga Mom." Wednesday morning, I was up at 6:30 waiting. Sure enough, at 6:55, cars started pulling into the small public parking area near my property, and women with yoga mats began making their way onto my beach. Patricia arrived last in her Mercedes, carrying a portable speaker that she set up on the sand. I had my camera ready this time, my phone set to video. I recorded the entire hour-long session from my deck, making sure to capture clear footage of Patricia leading the class and all the participants on my property. I also took photos of their cars, getting license plates. When the class ended, I went down to the beach again. Patricia was wrapping up her speaker cord, and she looked up at me with an expression of pure disdain. "Still here, I see," she said. "Still my beach," I replied, "and I'm documenting every session now." "Document whatever you want," Patricia said. "The HOA board met last night, and we've unanimously agreed that this yoga class serves the greater community good. We're not going to stop." "Then you're trespassing, all of you." One of the other women, a brunette in her 30s, spoke up. "This is so typical. Another man who can't stand seeing women have something for themselves." "This has nothing to do with gender," I said. "It has to do with property rights." "We'll see about that," Patricia said. "I've already contacted our HOA attorney. He's going to review your deed and the community bylaws. I'm sure we'll find that you're mistaken about your property boundaries." She wasn't going to find anything, because I was absolutely certain about my boundaries. Mr. Henderson had even shown me the survey stakes before I bought the place. But I let her go ahead and waste her attorney's time. Thursday morning, the class was back. 15 women, 1 speaker, 1 hour. I documented it all. Friday morning, the same thing. By the time Monday rolled around, I had a full week of documentation, but I didn't reach out to my attorney yet. Instead, I spent the weekend doing research. I looked up Florida trespassing laws. I researched property rights and HOA authority limits. And most interestingly, I looked into the legal precedents for charging rent on private property that others were using without permission. What I found was fascinating. In Florida, if someone uses your property without permission for commercial purposes, you can absolutely charge them fair market rent retroactively in civil court. And while yoga classes might seem casual, if the instructor was certified and organizing regular sessions, even if she wasn't directly charging the participants, It could potentially be considered commercial use, especially if it was through an official HOA program. I started researching what people charged for beachfront yoga classes in Destin. The going rate seemed to be around $40 to $60 per person per session. Patricia had 15 people in her class, 5 days a week. I did the math. If I used a conservative estimate of $40 per person, that was $600 per session. 5 sessions a week meant $3,000 per week. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I wanted to see just how far Patricia was willing to push this. The second week continued exactly like the first. Monday through Friday, 7 to 8 in the morning, yoga on my beach. I documented every single session. I kept detailed logs with dates, times, number of participants, and photos. Patricia started ignoring me entirely when I came out to the deck. She didn't even look in my direction anymore. The other women followed her lead, acting as if I didn't exist. On Wednesday of the second week, I found a letter in my mailbox from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation, stating that I was creating a hostile environment for community members attempting to participate in approved recreational activities, and that I was refusing to cooperate with community wellness initiatives. I was being fined $200. I called David Chen immediately. "They're fining you for not letting them trespass on your property?" he said, laughing in disbelief. "That's a new one. Can they do that?" "Absolutely not. HOAs have authority over common areas and architectural guidelines, things like that. They can't fine you for refusing to let them use your private property. This is actually getting into harassment territory." What should I do? For now, keep documenting. Don't pay the fine. If they try to put a lien on your property over it, we'll crush them in court. But York, seriously, if you want this to stop, I can send them a cease and desist today. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see how far they'll take this." David was quiet for a moment. "You're planning something." "Maybe. Just don't do anything that'll get you in trouble." "I'm not going to do anything illegal," I promised, "but I'm also not going to let them walk all over me." Week 3, the classes continued. I had now documented 15 separate yoga sessions on my private beach. Patricia's class had actually grown. There were now 18 regular participants. I started recognizing the individual women. There was the brunette who had accused me of sexism, whose name I learned was Jennifer. There was an older woman with gray hair who always set up her mat in the back corner. There was a redhead who wore designer yoga outfits that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. On Thursday of week 3, Patricia brought cupcakes. I watched from my deck as the women sat on my beach after their session, eating cupcakes and chatting like they were at a picnic in a public park. They stayed for an extra 30 minutes that day. I documented it all. Friday, I got another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that my fine had doubled to $400 because I had failed to remedy the violation. It also stated that I was now on probationary status with the HOA and that my behavior was being monitored. I filed the letter with all my other documentation. Week 4, I decided to try a different approach. On a Monday morning, I went down to the beach before the class arrived. I set up a folding chair right in the middle of where Patricia usually taught, and I sat down with a book and my coffee. When the women started arriving, there was confusion. Patricia showed up, saw me sitting there, and her face turned an interesting shade of red. "You need to move," she said. "It's my beach," I replied pleasantly. "I can sit wherever I want." "You're deliberately disrupting our class. I'm sitting on my own property. You're the ones who keep showing up uninvited." Patricia turned to her class. "Ladies, we'll set up around him. Don't let negative energy disrupt your practice." So they did. They literally set up their mats in a circle around me. I sat in my chair, reading my book, while 15 women did yoga in a circle around me like I was some kind of Zen garden sculpture. It was surreal. This continued Tuesday and Wednesday. I sat in my chair. They worked around me. Patricia's instructions became increasingly pointed, with lots of references to clearing negative energy and rising above obstacles. On Thursday, I brought a portable speaker and played classic rock, not loud enough to be a noise violation, but loud enough to be heard over Patricia's instructions. "This is harassment," she shouted over the sound of AC/DC. "It's my property," I shouted back. "I can play music on my own property." Friday, the HOA sent me a third letter. This one threatened legal action if I continued to harass HOA members during approved community activities. The fine was now up to $800. I called David again. "They're threatening to sue you," he said, "for sitting on your own beach and playing music." "That's what the letter says." "York, this is insane. Let me send them a cease and desist. Better yet, let me send them a letter explaining that they're the ones trespassing and that you could sue them." "One more week," I said. "Just give me one more week." "Why? What happens in one more week?" "That'll be 8 weeks of classes, 2 full months. I want to make sure I have ironclad documentation." David sighed. "You're definitely planning something. Just promise me it's legal." "I promise." Week 5, I went back to my original strategy of just watching and documenting. I had been tracking everything meticulously: dates, times, number of participants, duration of each session, even weather conditions. I had photos and videos. I had a detailed spreadsheet. Patricia seemed to think she had won. The classes were back to normal, running smoothly every morning. She had started bringing a portable shade tent, which she set up at the edge of my beach. The women would linger after class, chatting under the tent, sometimes for an additional hour. I documented every minute. On Wednesday of week 5, I went to City Hall in Destin. I spoke with someone in the property records department, and I got certified copies of my property deed, the survey, and every related document. I wanted official copies of everything, with the city stamp on them. Thursday, I visited 3 different law offices in the area, getting consultations about property rights and trespassing. Each attorney told me the same thing. I was absolutely in the right. The HOA was absolutely wrong, and I could pursue multiple different legal remedies. But I didn't want legal remedies through the courts. I wanted something more direct. Friday of week 5, I sat down and created an itemized bill. I used the conservative estimate of $40 per person per session. Patricia had started with 15 participants and grown to 18, so I used an average of 16.5 participants across the sessions. I multiplied that by $40, which gave me $660 per session. Over 8 weeks, Monday through Friday, that was 40 sessions total. $660 times 40 sessions equaled $26,400. I stared at the number on my computer screen. $26,400. That was what beachfront yoga instruction would cost for the number of sessions Patricia had run on my property. I created a professional-looking invoice using template software. At the top, I put property usage fee invoice in my name and address. I itemized every single session with the date, number of participants, and cost. At the bottom, I added a note: "This invoice represents fair market rate for commercial beachfront yoga instruction conducted on private property located at 4782 Coastal Drive, Destin, Florida, from March 5, 2026 to April 30, 2026. Payment is due within 30 days. I printed 3 copies, one for Patricia, one for the HOA board, and one for my records. Saturday morning, I put the invoice in an envelope and drove to Patricia's house. I knew where she lived because she had made a point of telling me during one of our early confrontations that she lived in the nicest section of Sunset Palms, the one with the golf course view. Her house was exactly what I expected: a large, pristine white McMansion with a perfectly manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. I rang the doorbell. Patricia answered in workout clothes, probably headed to some weekend yoga class or gym session. Her expression when she saw me was pure annoyance. "What do you want?" she asked. "I have something for you," I said, handing her the envelope. She opened it right there, pulling out the invoice. I watched her face as she read it, saw the exact moment her eyes reached the total amount. Her face went pale, then red, then purple. $26,000? She sputtered. "Are you insane?" "That's the fair market rate for what you've been doing on my property for the past 2 months, I said calmly. $40 per person is actually on the low end for beachfront yoga in Destin. I could have charged $50 or $60. "This is ridiculous. I'm not paying this." "You used my property without permission for commercial purposes. I documented every session. I have photos, videos, detailed logs. You can pay the invoice or I can take you to civil court." "Commercial purposes? I'm not running a business. This is a community service." You're a certified instructor running organized classes on a regular schedule. That's commercial use. The fact that you're doing it through the HOA doesn't change that. Patricia's husband appeared behind her, a tall man in golf clothes. What's going on? This lunatic is trying to charge me $26,000 for the yoga classes, Patricia shrieked. The husband, whose name I later learned was Robert, took the invoice from her and read it. His expression was much calmer than hers, and also much more concerned. Patricia, you've been running classes on someone else's private property? He asked. It's community property. It's always been available for community use. No, it hasn't, I said. I had the property records checked. This beach has been privately owned and deeded to the house since the original construction in 1987. There's never been any community easement or shared access agreement. Robert's jaw tightened. He was clearly doing mental math about what this could mean. We need to talk to our attorney, he said quietly to Patricia. We're not paying him a dime, Patricia insisted. Madam, you can pay the invoice or you can pay court costs and attorney fees on top of the usage fees, I said. Either way, I'm getting compensated for my property being used without permission. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving them standing in their doorway. Monday morning, I was curious to see if the yoga class would still happen. I was up at 6:30, coffee in hand, watching. 6:55 came and went. No cars, no yoga mats, no Patricia. 7 o'clock, still nothing. By 7:30, it was clear the class had been canceled. I felt a small surge of satisfaction. But that afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered to find a man's voice, professional and cold. Mr. Brennan? This is Gerald Foster. I'm the attorney for the Sunset Palms HOA. Hello, Mr. Foster. I'm calling regarding an invoice you delivered to Mrs. Patricia Williamson. I have to tell you, Mr. Brennan, this is one of the most absurd attempts at extortion I've ever seen. It's not extortion. It's a bill for services rendered, or rather, for property used without authorization. Mrs. Williamson was providing a free community service. She wasn't charging anyone for these classes. That doesn't matter. She was using my private property without permission for organized commercial activities. The fact that she wasn't charging the participants doesn't mean the usage had no value. I'm charging fair market rate for what that usage would cost. You gave no prior notice that you would be charging for this so-called usage. I gave notice from day one that it was my private property and that the classes needed to stop. Mrs. Williamson chose to ignore that notice repeatedly for 2 months. That's on her. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Brennan, I strongly advise you to withdraw this invoice. If you pursue this, we will fight it vigorously. The HOA has significant legal resources. So do I lied. My legal resources consisted of David Chen and whatever I could afford on a software engineer's salary, but Foster didn't need to know that. We'll be in touch, Foster said, and hung up. I immediately called David and told him about the conversation. They're going to try to intimidate you, David said. That's standard. HOA attorneys love to throw around threats about their significant resources. But York, here's the thing. You actually have a pretty solid case. Property owners absolutely have the right to charge for unauthorized commercial use of their property. There's precedent for it. So you think I could win? Win? Maybe. It would depend on the judge and exactly how they interpret the commercial use question. But here's what I think is more likely. They'll settle. Because even if they think they could win, the optics are terrible. HOA president runs yoga classes on someone's private beach without permission, refuses to stop when asked, gets billed for it. That's not a story the HOA wants in the local news. So what should I do? Sit tight, let them make the next move. And York? Don't talk to their attorney again without me present. Got it. For 3 days, nothing happened. The yoga classes didn't resume. I didn't hear from Patricia or the HOA attorney. It was quiet. Then, on Thursday evening, I got an email from the HOA board requesting my presence at an emergency meeting Friday night at 7 p.m. I forwarded the email to David. He called me immediately. Don't go to this alone. I'm coming with you. Is that really necessary? They're going to try to gang up on you, make you feel like you're the bad guy, pressure you into withdrawing the invoice. You want an attorney there. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow at 7. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a nice building near the entrance to Sunset Palms with a large meeting room. When David and I arrived, we found the entire 7-member HOA board seated at a long table at the front of the room. Patricia sat in the middle, her expression pure fury. About 30 other residents filled the chairs facing the board. This wasn't going to be a private conversation. This was going to be a public spectacle. Patricia called the meeting to order with a slam of her gavel. We're here tonight to address a serious issue involving Mr. York Brennan, a resident who has been engaging in predatory behavior toward community members. I felt David's hand on my arm, holding me back from responding. Mr. Brennan has submitted a fraudulent invoice to me personally, claiming that I owe him over $26,000 for community yoga classes that have been a beloved tradition in Sunset Palms for years. Several residents gasped, I heard muttering. These classes were free to all community members, Patricia continued. They promoted health, wellness, and community bonding. They were held in an area that has traditionally been used for community purposes. And now, Mr. Brennan is attempting to exploit this situation for financial gain. More muttering from the crowd, most of it hostile. David stood up. May I speak? Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. And you are? David Chen, Mr. Brennan's attorney. I'd like to clarify a few facts. First, the beach in question is not community property. It's private property, deeded specifically to Mr. Brennan's residence. I have certified copies of the property records if anyone would like to see them. He held up a folder. Second, Mr. Brennan notified Mrs. Williamson from the very first day that this was private property and that the classes needed to stop. She refused. He notified her repeatedly over the course of 2 months. She continued to refuse. The HOA has always used that beach, someone shouted from the crowd. The HOA has no legal right to use private property without the owner's permission, David replied calmly. That's not how property law works. I don't care what tradition you think you have. If the owner says no, it means no. Patricia's face was getting red again. This is about community spirit. This is about being a good neighbor. This is about property rights, David said. Mrs. Williamson is a certified yoga instructor who was running organized classes on someone else's property without permission. Whether she was charging for those classes is irrelevant. The usage itself had value, and Mr. Brennan is entitled to charge for that value. We're not paying that ridiculous invoice, Patricia said. Then we'll see you in court, David replied. And just so everyone here is aware, when this goes to court, it won't just be about the invoice. We'll also be pursuing damages for harassment, for the fraudulent HOA fines that were levied against Mr. Brennan, and for the ongoing trespass. The total could be significantly more than $26,000. The room went quiet. One of the other board members, an older man with white hair, spoke up. Perhaps we should discuss this in executive session. I think that's a good idea, another board member said. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outvoted. The board called for a 15-minute recess. David and I stepped outside. The night air was warm, typical for Florida in late April. That went well, David said. They hate me in there. They don't understand property law. They think because the HOA has power over some things, they have power over everything, but they don't. And the smart ones on that board know it. Did you see how fast those other members wanted to shut down the public discussion? They're worried. So what happens now? Now we wait and see if they're ready to be reasonable. It took 30 minutes, not 15, but eventually we were called back in. The crowd had thinned out a bit. Patricia looked like she had been crying, her eyes red and her makeup smudged. The white-haired board member spoke. Mr. Brennan, the board has discussed the situation. We believe there has been a misunderstanding about property boundaries and usage rights. We're prepared to make a one-time goodwill payment of $5,000 to resolve this matter and avoid costly litigation. No, I said. Patricia's head snapped up. What do you mean, no? I mean, no. The invoice is for $26,400. That's what the market rate is for what you did. I'm not negotiating down to a fraction of the actual value just because you don't want to pay what you owe. That's unreasonable, Patricia said. Biuse. What's unreasonable is using someone's property for 2 months after being told repeatedly to stop, I said. What's unreasonable is fining me for not letting you trespass. What's unreasonable is calling this meeting to publicly shame me for standing up for my property rights." David stood up again. "My client has been more than patient. He documented everything carefully. He gave multiple warnings, and he's charging a fair market rate. The HOA has 3 options: pay the invoice, settle for something closer to the actual amount, or go to court, but we're not settling for $5,000. The white-haired man looked at Patricia, then back at us. "Can we have another recess to discuss?" "Take all the time you need," David said. This recess lasted an hour. David and I went to a nearby coffee shop and came back. When we returned to the clubhouse, only the board members were left. The crowd was gone. Patricia wouldn't look at me. The white-haired man, who I learned was named Harold, spoke again. "Mr. Brennan, the board is prepared to offer $15,000 to settle this matter. That's as high as we can go without calling a special assessment on all the homeowners." I looked at David. He gave me a small nod. "$20,000, I said. "That's my bottom line. It's already a discount from the full amount." Harold looked at the rest of the board. There was whispering. Patricia sat with her arms crossed, refusing to participate. Finally, Harold nodded. $20,000. But we need certain terms. 1, you sign a release agreeing not to pursue any further claims related to this matter. 2, we need a confidentiality agreement. This doesn't get discussed publicly." "No confidentiality agreement," I said immediately. "I'm not going to be gagged about what happened." "Then we can't settle," Patricia said, speaking for the first time. "I'm not having this story spread around the community." "The story is already spread around the community," David pointed out. "You had 30 witnesses in here earlier tonight. You made this public, not us." More whispering among the board members. "Fine," Harold finally said. "No confidentiality agreement, but the release stands. You take the $20,000, you sign that you won't pursue any other claims." I thought about it. $20,000 wasn't the full amount, but it was substantial. And honestly, I didn't want to spend the next year fighting this in court. "I'll sign a release for claims related to the yoga classes," I said, "but not for the fraudulent fines. I want those removed from my account and a written apology for those." Patricia made a noise of protest, but Harold held up his hand. "Done. We'll remove the fines and provide a written statement that they were issued in error." "Then we have a deal," I said. David pulled out his laptop and started drafting the settlement agreement right there. It took another 2 hours to get the language right, with everyone signing off. By the time we left the clubhouse, it was almost 11 p.m. 2 weeks later, I received a check from the Sunset Palms HOA for $20,000. It came with a brief letter from Harold stating that the fines previously levied against my account had been removed and that they were issued in error. There was no apology from Patricia, but I didn't expect one. I deposited the check and took David out for an expensive dinner to celebrate. "You know, most of my clients would have just sent a cease and desist letter on day 1, David said, raising his wine glass. "Where's the fun in that?" I replied. "You're a strange man, York Brennan." Life in Sunset Palms settled down after that. The yoga classes never resumed on my beach. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had started running them in the community park instead, though attendance had apparently dropped significantly. Something about the energy not being the same without the ocean. Patricia avoided me completely. If she saw me at the grocery store or around the neighborhood, she would turn and go the other way. I was fine with that. The other HOA board members were more civil. Harold actually stopped by my house one afternoon, a few weeks after the settlement, to introduce himself properly. "I wanted to apologize for how that whole situation was handled," he said. "Patricia can be very forceful, and sometimes the board goes along with things we shouldn't. You were right about the property boundaries." "I appreciate that," I said. "For what it's worth, I think the settlement was fair, and it taught the board an important lesson about respecting property rights." We shook hands, and he left. I used some of the settlement money to do upgrades on my house. I built a proper deck with a gazebo, installed better outdoor lighting, and even added a fire pit right at the edge of my beach. I started having friends over on weekends for bonfires. One Saturday evening in late June, I was sitting by the fire with a few colleagues from work, enjoying the sunset. One of them, a guy named Marcus, asked me about the whole HOA situation. I had told him bits and pieces, but not the full story. I laid it all out for him, from the first morning I discovered the yoga class to the final settlement. "So you basically charged her $20,000 for trespassing?" Marcus said, laughing. "I charged her fair market rate for commercial use of my property," I corrected. The fact that she settled for $20,000 instead of the full $26,000 was her choice. "That's brilliant and petty, and I love it." "It's not petty, it's principle. She thought the rules didn't apply to her because she was the HOA president. She thought she could just do whatever she wanted and I'd roll over because I was new to the community, but property rights matter." "Damn right they do," Marcus said, taking a drink of his beer. We watched the waves for a while, the fire crackling beside us. "You know what the best part is?" I said. "Every morning now, when I have my coffee on the deck, I get to enjoy my beach in peace. No crowds, no speaker blasting instructions, no one treating my property like a public park. Just me, the ocean, and quiet." "That's worth $20,000 right there," Marcus said. He wasn't wrong. The Sunset Palms HOA, for their part, made some changes after the Patricia situation. At the next annual meeting, they voted in new bylaws that specifically addressed property rights and required board approval before using any private property for community activities, even with owner permission. They also implemented a new review process for fines, requiring a majority board vote rather than allowing the president to issue them unilaterally. Patricia remained president, but her power was significantly curtailed. I heard she wasn't happy about it, but the board had been spooked by the settlement. $20,000 was a lot of money to come up with, even spread across hundreds of homeowners. There was a special assessment of $43 per household to cover the settlement. I had to pay it too, which I found darkly funny. I was essentially paying myself $43 of my own settlement money. Several neighbors approached me after the assessment notices went out, asking what had happened. I told them the truth, showed them the property documents, explained the timeline. Most of them were sympathetic once they understood the full story. A few thought I should have just let Patricia use the beach, that I was being difficult over something small. To those people, I said the same thing. It wasn't about the beach. It was about the principle that you can't just take what isn't yours and expect no consequences. One evening in early July, I was walking my new dog, a rescue lab mix named Sunny, through the neighborhood. I passed by the community park where Patricia now held her yoga classes. There were maybe 8 people there, down from the 18 she'd had on my beach. Patricia saw me walking by and our eyes met for a moment. I nodded politely. She looked away. I continued my walk, Sunny pulling eagerly at the leash to investigate every interesting smell. When I got back home, I let Sunny run on the beach, watching him chase waves and dig in the sand. It was fully dark now, the stars beginning to appear overhead. The water was calm, barely any waves, just gentle rolling sounds. This was what I had bought the property for, this moment of peace, this private slice of Florida coast where I could relax and be myself without crowds or chaos. I thought about the past few months, about the confrontation with Patricia, the documentation, the settlement. Some people might think I had been too aggressive, that I should have handled it differently. Maybe they were right. But I also knew that if I had just sent a cease and desist letter on day 1, Patricia probably would have fought it. She would have dragged it out, made claims about community traditions, maybe even still tried to find me or make my life difficult. By letting her continue for 2 months while I documented everything, by building an ironclad case, I had put myself in a position of strength. And the settlement didn't just get me compensation. It sent a message to the entire HOA board that they couldn't push residents around. It resulted in new bylaws that protected everyone's property rights. In a weird way, what started as a personal dispute had ended up benefiting the whole community. I called Sunny back from the water, and we went inside. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed early. Life was good. The next morning, Sunday, I slept in until 9. When I finally got up and made coffee, I walked out onto my deck and looked down at my beach. Empty, peaceful, perfect. I thought about yoga class Patricia one more time, wondered briefly how she was doing, then decided I didn't really care. She had learned an expensive lesson about respecting other people's property. What she did with that lesson was up to her. I spent the rest of the day doing yard work, fixing a fence panel that had come loose, and enjoying my property, my private property, the property I had worked hard to afford, that I had bought fair and square, that I had every right to control. That evening, I grilled steaks on my new deck and invited my neighbor from 2 houses down, an older retired guy named Frank, who had been nothing but friendly since I moved in. We ate and talked and watched the sunset. "I heard about what happened with Patricia in the yoga classes," Frank said eventually. "I figured everyone had heard by now. For what it's worth, I think you were right to stand your ground. Patricia has been running roughshod over this HOA for years. Someone needed to push back." "It wasn't about the HOA politics," I said. "It was just about my property." "Sometimes those things are the same thing," Frank said wisely. We finished our steaks and Frank went home. I stayed out on the deck for a while longer, listening to the ocean, feeling the warm night breeze. I thought about the invoice I had created, that carefully itemized bill for $26,400. I thought about Patricia's face when she read it, the shock and anger and disbelief. I thought about the settlement, the negotiations, the final check. It had been quite a ride. But now it was over, and I could just enjoy my home. That's all I had ever wanted. Just to enjoy my home, my beach, my little piece of paradise that I had earned through years of hard work and saving. Was I vindictive for billing Patricia instead of just taking her to court immediately? Maybe. But she had been given every chance to stop. I had told her clearly and repeatedly that it was private property. She had chosen to ignore me, to fine me, to publicly shame me at an HOA meeting. Actions have consequences. That's a lesson everyone learns eventually. Patricia learned it at the cost of $20,000. I hope she thought it was worth it. As for me, I settled into my chair, put my feet up, and listened to the waves. This was worth every penny I had paid for the property. This peace, this privacy, this perfect little slice of Florida coast, my beach, my rules, my home, and nobody was going to take that away from me. The months after the settlement passed quietly. Summer turned to fall, and the Florida heat gradually became more bearable. I settled into a routine. Work during the week, beach time on the weekends, occasional dinners with neighbors who had proven to be friendly. The HOA kept its distance. I paid my dues on time, followed the community guidelines for things that were actually within the HOA's purview, and otherwise lived my life. No more yoga classes appeared on my beach. No more fraudulent fines arrived in my mailbox. In September, Harold knocked on my door again. He looked uncomfortable. "York, I wanted to give you a heads up about something," he said. "Patricia has announced she's not running for HOA president again when her term ends in December. She's actually planning to move. She and Robert bought a house in a different community." "Okay," I said, unsure why he was telling me this. "I just wanted you to know that she's claiming it has nothing to do with what happened with you. She's telling people they always plan to move, that their house is too big now that their kids are grown." "Harold, I genuinely don't care why she's moving. I'm just glad she won't be running the HOA anymore." He smiled, looking relieved. "Fair enough. I also wanted to tell you that I'm running for president. And if I win, I'm going to make sure the board respects property rights and follows the actual law, not just whatever seems convenient." "You've got my vote," I said. Harold did win the presidency. And true to his word, he ran the HOA very differently than Patricia had. Meetings were shorter and more focused. Fines were only issued for legitimate violations and only after proper notice. Residents actually seemed happier. Patricia and Robert moved in January. I saw the moving truck from my window but didn't go over to say goodbye. What would have been the point? A young couple with a toddler bought the house. They seemed nice, waving whenever they saw me around the neighborhood. By the time February rolled around, almost a full year since the yoga class incident began, the whole thing felt like ancient history. The neighborhood had moved on. I had moved on. But I kept the documentation, all the photos, all the videos, all the detailed logs. I kept the invoice too, and the settlement agreement. Not because I thought I'd ever need them again, but because they represented something important. They represented standing up for yourself. Standing up for your rights, not backing down when someone with perceived power tries to bully you. I had learned something important through the whole experience. Most bullies back down when you actually stand up to them. Patricia had been used to getting her way, used to people being intimidated by her position as HOA president. But when faced with actual legal consequences, when confronted with documentation and property law and the possibility of going to court, she had folded. Not immediately, of course. She had fought and blustered and tried to shame me publicly. But ultimately, the HOA had settled. They had paid me $20,000 because they knew I was right. That money, invested wisely, had grown nicely over the year. I used some of it for home improvements, saved some for retirement, and donated some to a local environmental group that worked to preserve Florida beaches. It felt appropriate, using money from the yoga class settlement to help protect beaches. One afternoon in March, exactly a year after I had first discovered Patricia's yoga class on my beach, I was sitting on my deck when a woman jogged by on the public beach access path. She stopped, did a few stretches, and then approached my property line. "Excuse me," she called up. "I'm new to the area. Is this beach public access?" "No," I said politely. "This section is private, but there's public access about 200 feet that way." I pointed north. "Oh, okay, thanks." She jogged off, simple, polite, respectful of property boundaries. That's all I had ever wanted from Patricia, just basic respect. I went inside and made lunch, Sonny following me hopefully, always optimistic that lunch might include something for him. I gave him a small piece of cheese, which he took delicately from my fingers before trotting off to his bed. Life was good. Life was quiet. Life was exactly what I had hoped it would be when I bought this property. Sometimes I thought about what would have happened if I had handled things differently. What if I had immediately lawyered up and sent a cease and desist? What if I had called the police for trespassing? What if I had just let Patricia use the beach and tried to ignore it? Each option would have led to a different outcome. But I was satisfied with the path I had chosen. The 2-month documentation period had given me a strong case. The invoice had been creative and effective. The settlement had been fair. And, most importantly, I had made my point. You don't get to use other people's property without permission, regardless of your position or your supposed community traditions or your belief that the rules don't apply to you. Property rights matter, boundaries matter, respect matters. Patricia had learned that lesson the hard way, and it had cost her $20,000 plus the embarrassment of having to explain to the community why there was a special assessment. I didn't feel guilty about it, not even a little bit. As I finished my lunch, my phone rang. It was David Chen. "Hey, York, how's paradise?" he asked. "Quiet and perfect," I said. "What's up?" "Nothing really. I was just thinking about your case the other day. I'm teaching a property law seminar at the community college, and I used your situation as an example of creative civil remedies. You didn't use my name, did you?" No, I kept it anonymous, but the students loved it. One of them asked if it was a real case or something I made up because it sounded too perfect. I laughed. "It did kind of work out perfectly, didn't it?" "It really did. You played it smart, York. A lot of people would have lost their temper and done something stupid. You stayed calm, documented everything, and built a case. That's exactly what you're supposed to do." "I had a good lawyer," I said. "You had good instincts," David replied. "The lawyer just made sure you didn't screw it up." We chatted for a few more minutes before hanging up. I appreciated David's call. It was nice to be reminded that I had handled the situation well, that my approach had been smart and effective. The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. I read a book, took Sonny for a walk, and eventually started dinner. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I stood on my deck and watched the colors reflect off the water. This view, this peace, this privacy, that's what I had bought. That's what I had fought for. And that's what I had won. The yoga class incident had tested me in ways I hadn't expected when I moved to Florida. It had forced me to stand up for myself, to navigate HOA politics, to deal with someone who thought their wants trumped my rights. But I had passed that test. And now, standing here watching the sunset over my private beach, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was my home. This was my sanctuary. This was the dream I had worked years to achieve, and no HOA Karren was ever going to take it away from me. I raised my beer in a silent toast to myself, to property rights, to standing your ground, into the $20,000 that proved actions have consequences. Then I went inside, fed Sonny his dinner, and settled in for a quiet evening at home. My beach, my rules, my victory. And that's exactly how it should be.